20 weeks, Times Network, India's most influential television network, drove riveting conversations with some of the best minds from across key focus sectors to build a roadmap for India's growth trajectory. What are some of the issues that challenge the Indian economy?
Coal is something that we have to worry about.
All those areas which are linked to crude, they will see an impact.
What are the government's growth stimulation strategies?
It is in the interest of the economy to give stability in policy, and it is in the interest of the economy to sustain the growth.
The feedback we are getting from MSMEs is a level of optimism.
What are some of the key tenets of India's growth story?
What is important is to create sustainable income for people, which can only be done through job creation.
And can India successfully navigate the economic headwinds that she faces?
The ball has to be moved to the entrepreneur.
The government has addressed both the issue, fiscal prudence as well as the growth also.
We address them all at the Punjab National Bank presents Times Network India Growth Mission, as leading minds from across India's business, policy and economic landscape came together to crystallize key action points for a comprehensive growth story to protect and build India's robust economy. As we bring this season to a close, we take a look at how India can turn uncertainty into an opportunity.
And welcome to the grand finale of Punjab National Bank presents Times Network India Growth Mission. I'm Tamanna Inamdar. Through the last several weeks, we've been bringing you stories of India's growth, resilience and recovery, especially after COVID-19. While that pace of recovery has been commendable, we're now facing headwinds from every quarter. There is a war going on between Russia and Ukraine, which is impacting supply chains. On the other hand, we're seeing inflation, which is becoming difficult to beat back. Well, the truth is this is something that people around the world, nations around the world, and economies around the world are facing. The question we're posing today is, how will India fare compared to the rest? Can we emerge stronger and quickly move to the growth that we all expect and anticipate? First, let me go across to my colleague Mihir Bhatt to set the context.
Welcome to this special episode of India Growth Mission. I have a very special guest with me. I have Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal with me, joining on this special broadcast. Mr. Sanyal, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for being part of this special initiative at Times Network called India Growth Mission. You know, our mission throughout this series has been basically focusing on the main growth areas that India can actually capitalize on to develop a long-term growth trajectory. Keeping that in mind, and the current state where we are right now, while in the short term there are some headwinds in terms of the global inflationary pressures, the war in Ukraine, its impact on commodity prices, and obviously the disruption which is still continuing in global supply chain in some form of or the other. At least in the short term, how concerned are you about the global growth situation in Indian context?
Well, there's no doubt that inflation globally is a major issue. And here in India, we are also seeing some part of that flow through to prices. We are an energy importing country, so we can't be insulated from global oil prices. And of course, other commodities are also high. So in that sense, we in the government certainly are taking, watching these price rises with some concern on the energy front. Domestically driven inflation is not really the issue in the case of India. Our supply side is responding wherever possible, but wherever there are these imported disruptions, whether it's for oil, but there are also for things like chips, for example, where there are disruptions which are filtering through to sectors like automobiles. We do need to be cognizant of the fact that these are pressures that we need to take into account. Now, what can we do? Well, one is keep our supply side at least internally, so that the feed through is as minimal as possible. Very importantly, maintain macroeconomic control. This is very, very critical for the medium term, whether it's in terms of money supply, or domestic interest rates. You've already seen the Reserve Bank has preemptively begun to increase interest rates, and money supply in India, even through the cycle of the pandemic, where many other countries may have gone overboard with their monetary easing, we maintain money supply growth at reasonably controlled levels. So all of that means that from a macroeconomic stability perspective, things are in control. But yes, we are a part of the rest of the world, and we have to be cognizant that there will be some feed through to us.
Right. I want to basically focus on the long-term scenario. And from that point of view, I think one thing which has emerged very clearly post-pandemic and even now continues to evolve is world's attention on China plus one policy, the continuing disruption of various supply chains in China, and India's emergence as a very stable, predictable, growth-oriented economy. Now, if we keep, all these factors together, then there is a good case for Indian economy to remain in a high growth trajectory scenario for a couple of years to come. As a country, how do we capitalize on that?
You're absolutely right that global supply chains are indeed diversifying, and India is an obvious country to take advantage of that. I think people are beginning to appreciate our much more stable democratic political system. They're also appreciating the large number of supply chain improvements we have done, not only in terms of external, but even internally inside the country, in terms of building up the roads, highways, air networks, and so on. And also, of course, very importantly, being able to implement the GST system. Till very recently, we were not a internally integrated market. So we're not a common market. We could go around the world and say India is a large market, but in fact, we were not a common market. So with the implementation of GST, we are able to then leverage our internal market. So all of this means that we are in a position to create scale, which is something that historically we were not very good at doing, particularly in the manufacturing sector. So infrastructure on one side, building up a common market on the other side, and then using schemes like the PLI scheme in order to create scale. Again, an important issue that we have all historically had is that in the name of protecting the MSME sector, we actually introduced all kinds of restrictions which actually restricted them. So what we have done for the first time is create a PLI scheme which is really like a ladder, allowing medium-sized players to scale up very, very rapidly, even larger players to scale up to be even larger, because if you want to be in the global scale, you need to be able to have Chinese scale factories to be able to have those economies of scale. So it is important here, therefore, to understand that we are now thinking like a country that can be an alternative. All this while, we always restricted ourselves in various ways. And I think what is good in the last few years is that we are thinking in the correct scale, whether it's in terms of infrastructure, in terms of the policies and the ambition we have. And I think that those are beginning to pay off.
Right. Now, sir, I have a question about the current situation, which is obviously looks like a prolonged situation in terms of what is happening in Europe. And I'm not talking about the war, but the evolving scenario. World ran into the global pandemic crisis, then it ran into supply chain issues, which mainly emerged from China. Now it has run into this so-called war. Then there are inflationary pressures. Now, obviously, some of these, I would say, triggers are going to have a much lasting or a longer effect on the global economy. How is India placed in this whole situation right now? One is, I understand that people are looking at India as an alternate manufacturing destination or a supply chain port of sorts. But how are we placed otherwise in this global geopolitical economic scenario, if I can put it like that?
I think the important thing to be able to deal with an uncertain, evolving world is that we need to engage with it, keeping in mind our national interests and also being unapologetic about following those national interests. I think you have seen, for example, whether it's the way we dealt with the RCEP issue. We felt that RCEP didn't fit into our national interests. There was a lot of pressure to go in and sign up for it. We didn't. But that doesn't mean we are sort of moving into some of an inward-looking, import substitution kind of worldview. That's not at all true. We have pursued free trade agreements with other countries. We recently signed one with Australia. We have done one with UAE. We are aggressively pursuing other ones, for example, with the UK. So it is not that we do not recognize the evolving situation. We take a pragmatic view of what the options are at each point in time and evolve with it. And the same thing has happened even with the issue of our response to sanctions or otherwise with Russia. We stood our ground as far as importing Russian oil is concerned. Ironically, many of the critics of that policy are themselves importing gas and oil from Russia on a much greater scale than we are. But in the past, we would have quite easily caved in. What has changed is that we stand our ground when it deals with our interests, and I think people have begun to respect that.
Absolutely. Sir, since you mentioned energy, and this is a slightly short-term issue, but I have this question, that is basically the energy prices. The way things are moving right now, the crude is obviously hovering somewhere way above our comfort level and even above our budgetary estimates. Now, maybe from medium to long-term view, it will settle down or it will adjust itself. But is it a concern, especially in the current fiscal situation where we have a couple of issues to tackle with?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, we are an importer of oil. High oil prices is something that hurts us, no question about it, and certainly oil prices in the range of $110 per barrel is something we in India are not happy about. But we have to deal with it in various ways, particularly in terms of the feed through to the general population. We have limited scope for maneuvering. One of the things we did do back in November was to cut some of the taxes. And some of the states also cut taxes. Maybe there's some of the states that didn't cut taxes then can now perhaps follow through. But I think at some level we have to realize that whatever the feed through we allow, if we don't want that feed through to happen, there is a fiscal price somewhere we have to make an adjustment, whether it's in terms of cutting taxes or some other way. And each one of those measures has some price to be paid. I mean, at the margin, maybe we can buy some oil from Russia or some such thing, but frankly, in the end, we have to figure out a way of becoming much more independent of this imported oil problem. And, as it happens to be, we may not have a lot of hydrocarbons in India, but we are endowed with a lot of sunshine. So certainly, renewables is an area that is of interest to us. We also need to maintain a bouquet of other sources as well. So I am a votary that we should pursue seriously nuclear power. And of course, some amount of coal-based electricity production also needs to be maintained in this country, even into the future. So whether it's driven by domestic mining or by imports from Australia, we do need to maintain a certain mix of energy such that if any particular source of energy suddenly becomes expensive or difficult for whatever reason, we have other sources to make up for it. But of course, not merely for climatic reasons, but simply because of the nature of our natural resources, pursuing renewables, particularly solar, is something we need to do and sustain.
When we are looking at next 25 or even 50 years and the kind of potential that India holds right now, how concerned are you about this the so-called federal structure, because what happens is, in many cases we have seen that the policies are announced and rolled out, or projects are announced and rolled out by the central government, and in some cases we have seen that the states will drag their feet in terms of land allocation, adopting to policies. From an foreign investor point of view, or purely from confidence point of view, it sometimes becomes a sort of a dampener. How do we address that?
Well, I mean, the various roles of different levels of government are well laid out. There are things that the central government needs to do, and hopefully we are doing a decent job of it. Incidentally, the specific case of the legal system being upgraded, a large section of that depends on the judiciary, not even on the central government. But yes, things like municipal services in particular, or local support for industry and business, whether foreign or Indian, has to come at the state level, or even at the municipal level. And it is true that there is a fairly wide range of outcomes depending on the state. Some states are clearly better at it than others are, for different reasons. Now, my own view is that while there are certain amount of sort of top-down incentivization that the central government can do for specific things, I am a believer that ultimately you've got to allow democracy to work. So this is not about, wise mandarins of Planning Commission or the Prime Minister's Economic Council or Niti Aayog, who are headmasters who must be telling what the state should do. That is not at all the case. Ultimately, the people of these individual states have to demand services, and that's the only way it will work in a democracy. So there is no easy way. Until people demand services and quality, you cannot ultimately resolve this issue. So, it goes back to the core of that. The good news is that people now have much better sources of information, whether they travel more, they have very often you'll have relatives in different parts of the country, your social media. All of this means that people are getting much better information than access than they probably ever had. And presumably if one or two states do a lot better than the others, then the news gets around. So I think that ultimately is an important part of this. And I don't think it is about people sitting in the center wielding a headmaster stick that is the ultimate way. I'm much more in favor of a decentralized bottom-up approach of competitiveness that ultimately allows local governments to perform better.
Absolutely. Sir, I have last two questions. The first one is about two major challenges that we, and I think the entire Southeast Asia, faces to some extent. One is the climate crisis, or the climate emergency as we call it. And the second, in case of India, is especially creating right kind of jobs for right kind of people. Because obviously, I mean, we will end up creating a lot of jobs, but the fact is we do need much more jobs than maybe what we create right now in the formal sector. What is your view on these two very critical issues? Because somewhere it will swing the needle for us in terms of where we are 25 years down the line.
Well, as far as climate change is concerned, it certainly is an important issue. And incidentally, climate change is something that happens all the time throughout history. Our first urban civilization, the Harappan civilization, ultimately got destroyed by climate change and the drying up of a critical river. So we know that climate change is a very serious thing and does have major ramifications. So I certainly think that we need to not just think about mitigation, but a lot more about adaptation. Whether we like it or not, climate will now change, and we are probably already well past the tipping point. So we should be prepared for major change, and it requires us to be a lot more flexible on all kinds of things. For example, on agricultural policy, we do need to pay a lot more attention in terms of much more resilience of crops, rather than just growing more and more calories, which is how we have currently set up our agricultural policy. So crops like, for example, the millet crops, which are much more resilient to variation in climate, are things that we need to take more seriously. So as far as jobs is concerned, certainly creating more and more jobs is an important part, because, as I said, we need to deploy more people in new and emerging sectors. This is critical because obviously we were also going through the demographic cycles that will, for the next 20, 25 odd years, create a disproportionate proportion of our population will be of working age, and we need to be able to absorb them. So in that sense, it is very important that we create jobs. However, you had a statement in there, the right kind of jobs to the right people. Now, I do want to make it very clear that I'm uncomfortable with the idea that, this is done in a planning sort of way. Most of the jobs of the future are still not known, and they may emerge out of areas that we have not imagined. So I am a little uncomfortable with this idea about having top-down policies to try and guess where these jobs will pop up from. Policymakers and bureaucrats are notoriously poor at being able to guess that. So I think what really matters is to maintain open policies, allow for creative destruction, allow for flexibility, make sure that the frameworks in which entrepreneurs, startups, companies, and individuals take decisions remains as easy as possible, so that there's ease of living, ease of doing business, so that as things evolve, new sectors arise and so on, our job market is able to evolve with it. So I think that is very important, that we create the conditions for this evolution rather than try and guess where those jobs will be. As I said, I am very, very skeptical of the ability of policymakers to be able to guess where they will be.
Right. I love your honesty. One last question to you, sir. In fact, not even a question, but we at Times Network strongly believe, and it has been part of our many initiatives and conversations, that India doesn't only have the demographic dividend, we also have a very strong democratic dividend, especially in the current scheme of things or the current global scenario. It is a huge plus that we are a strong democracy in 75th year of independence, and it provides to a great extent, it provides stability and predictability of the way country will move or the policies will evolve. What is your take on that? How do we capitalize on this democratic dividend apart from demographic dividend?
Well, I think we Indians are way too apologetic about the noisiness of our democracy. It's noisy. There's lots of opinions that bounce about. And sadly, we tend to sort of think that is somehow a disadvantage. My own view is that, look, since my entire basis of my argument is that you allow for churn, of creative destruction, of all kinds of flexibility, well, in that context, democracy, it's also true in the political sphere as far as democracy is concerned. There's lots of, let different people come up with new ideas, let that churn. Some of them will get tried out in different states, the better ones will presumably survive, and so on. And so in that way, we will make our way forward. So this allows for a certain degree of flexibility that, for example, other systems may not have. But it does require one thing, that we as Indians have faith in this messy process. And as I said right at the beginning, we are way too apologetic about this, especially when we are dealing with foreign media critics, for example. We tend to get all very defensive. There's no reason for us to be defensive, whether it's in terms of the way our system, messy as it is, may be, or in terms of our pursuit of national interests in international forums. There is absolutely no reason for us to be apologetic. We are now the world's fastest growing economy, democracy or otherwise. As far as, while I always take forecasts with a pinch of salt, at least for this year and next year, the IMF clearly forecasts us to be growing at much higher rates than even China, and I think that is sustainable. So I think we are on a good wicket here, and we should pursue rational policies as far as we can, maintain flexibility, continue to pursue international export markets, upgrade our technology, and in every one of these spheres, not be apologetic.
Absolutely. So thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure having you on this special episode of India Growth Mission. Thank you so much.
Thank you.